I'd like to call to order this meeting, this work session of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education. Laura, could you please call the roll?
Garcia.
Here.
Gebhardt.
Here.
Niznik. Here. Rajpal. Here. Sargent.
Here.
Sweeney Moran.
Here.
Zis. Thank you.
Dr. Anderson, I'll turn it over to you to do the introductions.
Thank you, Board President Gebhardt, members of the board. Thanks for being here this evening for our presentation on our preliminary budget. We'll be starting this presentation to overview some of the information we've been collecting on several of our initiatives around academic return on investment. As the board will recall and the public will recall, AROI is something that's an element of our strategic plan. We've worked really hard to begin to leverage this methodology in meaningful ways. And so we'll start today's presentation with a bit of the work that we've done with academic return on investment, and then you will see the results of some of that work in the preliminary budget that will be presented afterwards. So we're joined today by our Chief Financial Officer, Bill Sutter, our Deputy Superintendent of Academics, Laura De La Cruz, and our Director of Planning and Assessment, Jonathan Dings. Jonathan and Laura obviously switched your name tags are in the other places. So in any event, but they're all here, and excited to turn the presentation over to Dr. De La Cruz.
Good evening, President Gebhardt, members of the board. As Dr. Anderson relayed, we are starting this work session presentation with an update and information about the work underway and that we're studying as part of our Academic Return on Investment Strategic Plan initiative. As we shared at the board meeting back in November, our AROI work includes evaluating the implementation and impact of our virtual intervention program, our investments to address disproportionate discipline and law enforcement referrals, and our work in Grad Plus. So as the board recalls, our VIP program consists of 3 BVSD teachers who are providing interventions to students across 9 schools. Those are schools that are in our targeted support school category, where 3rd through 5th graders were identified based on deficits in foundational reading skills, needs in those areas, particularly relevant given that at these grade levels, students largely missed out on learning foundational reading skills because they were in those formative grades during the pandemic. Students selected for the VIP program were screened for discrete reading skills in those foundational skills of phonics, phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, and decoding. Important to note that this identification of missing those foundational skills, as well as being at least a year below grade level in reading, are the unique qualifiers for the VIP program. So 130 students in 18 groups participated in round 1 across schools during that first semester, and in second semester during round 2, 159 students in 21 groups across schools are participating in the VIP program. So while 159 students for this round may not sound like much at face value, this is only 3 FTE, so 3 teachers, and VIP is able to serve many more students across campuses over the course of a day or a week than allocating 3 FTE in a traditional brick and mortar situation. So the comparative economy of scale is noteworthy here in that 3 teachers, 3 FTE, would have to be spread across 9 schools, so 3 schools per teacher to serve this many students, and that simply would not be a feasible formula. So with the VIP, the expertise of highly qualified, highly trained teachers using an evidence-based approach is so far looking to be a successful model. We have some of that data to share with you next, and although VIP has served students in 3rd through 5th grades, we've collected the comparison data for 4th and 5th grade that we're going to share with you, and that was simply due to the logistics of when the data was reviewed and the time frame of data collection. So Jonathan is going to share this data with you now.
So the
So the overarching headline here is that gains made in the fall VIP cohort were greater than or equal to both students in other interventions and students who didn't have any intervention. But to dig into this a little bit more, what we did is we looked at a matched group of students who had been in BVSD this year and last, and we compared the ways in which those kids' scale scores moved on iReady. And what you see is that the VIP, oh dear, I can't zoom in on that. What you see for grade 4, and you'll see the same pattern in grade 5, is that the red line, which is the VIP fall cohort, went up relatively steeply from fall to winter. That's exactly the time the kids were getting the intervention. And if we look at the green line above that, that's the spring VIP cohort. They were not getting this intervention in fall. So looking at these scores, as I would expect to see this kind of pattern, right, if things are working well. And then we'll get to look harder at these scores in a couple months, right? When we can look at data to see if the spring students who get VIP also have a very sharp gain, and hopefully, if the gains hold for the students who got it in fall. This chart is also useful for thinking about it in terms of some of the ways in which the VIP cohort of kids isn't the same as kids getting every other intervention necessarily, right? I've labeled a couple of others on here. One is in the gray line at the bottom is Wilson reading. That would be focused on kids with IEPs. And the other one is Ordinary Gillingham, right? All of those are showing gains, but we aren't showing that these groups all started at the same place, and we aren't making the claim with these data that one intervention is interchangeable for the other, and in fact, we would have some cautions about how many kids can be served at a time based on based on the needs. So we really appreciate having the capacity to look at these data over time and have, I think, really good information here about the effectiveness of VIP.
So the students that are participating in VIP don't have dyslexia or don't have an IEP, or how are they cohorted differently than the folks that are going into the Wilson or the OG cohorts? Does that make sense? Like, how are we identifying
Sure.
in addition to just being behind level?
Yep. So they're much less likely to have an IEP. That is, if a student's already receiving services that way, it'd be not as common. There are a few, but not as many. Whereas with Wilson reading, that's really focused on kids with IEPs with needs around reading. There were also some criteria applied where the VIP program for fall did focus on kids who had pretty high attendance. So there were some criteria about that in not getting another intervention at your home school. So the focus is that way in this group.
And then how are those 9 schools selected?
Those are schools that are categorized as targeted support schools. And so, as you know, we have flexible support, high support, and targeted support. And they were selected specifically because those schools were, schools in the high support category are receiving different kinds of support, more differentiated funding, and schools in that targeted category have more students than those in the high support category or flexible support category who are in need of some interventions but have less resources. And so they seemed like the ideal school for us to begin the work in VIP.
Am I reading this correctly, that our special ed students are the bottom line?
Yes.
So we still have a fair amount of work to do with those students.
And have gains that are the same kind that we were seeing for the other interventions that we have in our higher gains than folks who have no intervention there on the top line. All right. After all that, we see the same kind of pattern at grade 5, only with an even higher gain. So, so what I think we have here is good positive evidence for the effectiveness of the virtual intervention program, and of course, I look forward to having more data to see how things hold up over time.
So are our teachers at capacity with the 3 teachers that FTE dedicated to this? Would we be able to add more students to their caseload, or is that we're kind of there?
When you see the preliminary budget, you'll notice that, that we're actually recommending an increase in this investment. I would say that, what I don't want to be lost is that these 289 students, for the most part, because of the sparsity of students with needs in these schools, there wouldn't be enough kids with the needs to have a full-time in-person interventionist, and so they would have gone without intervention. And so as we think about these interventions having similar or greater effects in the limited scope of data that we've looked at, what I look at is the growth for students with no intervention versus the VIP, which is pretty significant, almost double in 4th grade and more than double in 5th grade. And so, I think that really excited about the potential. And I think that's something that public education doesn't, not just public education, but you see it a lot in public education, is we see something, we see a spark of promise, and then we try to blow it out of the water before we give it time to incubate and grow and develop. And so, not growing from 3 to everybody's getting virtual intervention, but growing small in bits and pieces to continue to refine the program. And so I think that you will, I know that this is what you'll see as we get into the budget presentation, preliminary budget presentation, is a small growth in this program, hoping that, continue to keep the effectiveness.
Kitty?
So I just want to clarify for the spring VIP, are these students in it now?
Yes, they are.
Okay, they were not in it last spring?
Correct.
Okay, I thought so.
Beth?
Just a quick question. I really appreciate that I'm seeing, as Rob said, there's only 12 points with the no intervention, and we're seeing 32 in the VIP group for 5th grade. That's awesome. Great response to intervention. Anecdotally, are we hearing from students and teachers comments about their experience and how that differs, learning online versus learning in person, and what are we hearing about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. Dr. Anderson and I are in schools every day talking to teachers, and then I've been having separate check-ins with teachers on another conversation. And what we are hearing without prompting is a lot of praise for the growth and the gains that students who participated in round 1 made, and how those are sticking, and they're showing up as strong, confident readers who are participating differently because they now have the skills that were missing to participate at that level. And so we're really excited to hear straight from our teachers that the skills that students are gaining from VIP are sticking and being applied to their reading so that they can continue growing. And then that's anecdotal. Also anecdotally, we've heard of, our VIP teachers go into schools, they assess kids, they build relationships, they work with teachers in person, and that they've been at schools and met, parents who were picking up students and said, you have changed the life, of my child and the dynamic of our family by teaching my child the skills they need to be successful readers. So really exciting. Hard data and anecdotal data also.
Richard or Lisa? So Rob, can you explain to me, I'm troubled by the no intervention. Teachers are differentiating their instruction and trying to get all of these students to move, so they aren't really not intervening. It's just can you explain that? Because I don't think the message that we're not intervening with our students who are struggling is the right message.
Sure. I think that the intent there is no intervention outside of their general education teacher. And so we can make that change as we upload this to provide more clarity around this for our public, right? The idea is that these are kids that, all the intervention they're getting is from their general ed teacher, not from somebody who's an interventionist or participating in one of our designated intervention programs.
Because all our teachers went through the training on how to teach reading. They had to do that as part of the state. So I just think we have to be careful how we message that they aren't getting any intervention as opposed to the kinds of differentiated instruction they're getting and the kinds of intervention they're getting.
No, I think that's a point well taken. I think we can make those changes. Thank you.
Also, as part of our implementation study for AROI, we are looking carefully and deeply at the impact on disproportionate discipline and referrals to law enforcement in connection with our restorative practices coordinator, our organizational focus, and our system-wide professional learning. Our restorative practices coordinator, as you know, is working closely with schools to increase restorative practices training and application at school sites. We continue to align our organizational focus in which we are utilizing data. We are tracking and monitoring the processes that we've put in place for documentation of student support and essential information sharing. And this work is also carried out in the form of our monthly professional learning that happens through our Vortex meetings, that happens through our principal and assistant principal meetings, our PK-12 meetings, our meetings with deans. And at all of those meetings, we're calibrating the efforts that I've just named around these investments.
So one of the things that we're seeing here that gives me confidence that we have made real changes to the process of discipline, right, is that we have about 100 fewer total suspensions than we had at this time last year, and that we're about 150 fewer out-of-school suspensions, right, with the emphasis being on minimizing the number of times that we aren't serving a student in school. And that we've seen that the decrease in these is about evenly balanced between Latinx and white students. But the impact of that, right, is that we're making changes. We're not suspending as much. We're not doing out-of-school suspending as much. But an issue that we find is that the proportionality issue that we had remains. So there's a positive movement overall, but there is more work to be done here. And I've just begun looking at pieces that would suggest we're seeing more change in high schools than we are in middles, but I need to look at that more. I don't have a prepared piece here. That was the last thing I looked at before I came to this meeting. We are also on track for fewer law enforcement
Nicole had a
referrals.
question, sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. So can you speak to how those disproportionalities have changed? So these capture a point in time, but from this time last year, how are we more or less disproportionate in each of those groups that you're identifying? Like, how is the needle moving? You say 100 and 150 fewer suspensions overall, that the disproportionality hasn't changed much, but where could you give more detail? Like, we're at 218 out-of-school suspensions for Hispanic, Latinx students. What was it last year at this point in time? You know, that relative change year over year, not the total change for all of our
Sure,
students?
Sure. So let me apologize in advance for having more talking points than I had in individual slides. The image that you're seeing here is the number of students with one or more suspensions. And while I don't have the exact figure from day 142 of the school year, or whatever we're on now, where we are overall is we're going to be about 100 lower in the total number of suspensions. So for instance, our total number was 875 last year versus 767 this year. And in the breakdown of that was about 50 fewer for Latinx students, about 50 fewer for white students, and an increase of about 20 for African American students. So as far as a point in time piece, and I can give you numbers for out of school also, and would acknowledge here there are multiple metrics that we're looking at and thinking about where we are, and I have a couple more images to show.
That's helpful, and I appreciate that, because anecdotally, some of what I've been hearing is that there are just fewer disciplinary infractions across the board. And so if all of our groups are moving down, we're not really getting at the disproportionality, we're just potentially disciplining everybody less. I'm just trying to see how are those numbers moving with this targeted work we're doing, or where are they moving or not moving?
Oh.
Can he answer the question and then go, Richard? Is that all right? Go ahead.
Well, I was hoping to answer by going to the next slide, but
Right.
we can go either way.
That's fine. Well,
as the
Richard,
pleasure.
go ahead, and then we'll go to the next slide, if that's all right, Nicole.
Yeah, just a quick question. Of the out-of-school suspensions, have you done any work in terms of what schools are contributing more than other schools?
We did some pretty intensive work in October around, we looked at maybe the 4 or 5 schools where had the most suspensions during that time. Up to that point in the school year, we did some interventions at a couple of our schools to try to really dig into their supervision plans, how they were responding, making sure that they had the proper trainings and resources. And I would say that if we were to look month to month, and board members, we can get you any data that you'd want on this. We have it on our dashboard, but we'd be happy to present that to you. We started to begin to see declines from October all the way till January. I believe we had a bit of a spike February, March, potentially. So we can break this down for you month by month, school by school. So I do think that we have a lot of work to do here. This is the type of data that you continue to focus on, and it nudges in the right positive directions. I would actually be worried if we had massive reductions in suspensions. I would be worried that we weren't addressing the behaviors, and I'd be worried that schools would just not be addressing the behaviors with the supports and consequences necessary in order to make the numbers look better if we focus just on the numbers. And it's just really, really hard, difficult work, changing practices. We were at a school today around, and depending upon your school and the school community, I think kids are showing up with more needs than in some of our schools than the school's ever seen before. And so the school's having to adjust their practices, being more intentional with rules and procedures and clarity and expectations. To quote a teacher I spoke to today, what she said is, Dr. Anderson, it used to be, if a kid was doing something, I could just give them the look. And when I gave them the look, it stopped. Now when I give them the look, my look doesn't work anymore, right? So, continuous training, I believe our training has been impactful. I believe the systems and structures have created data that's more accurate than it's ever been before. We're more transparent than we've ever been before. And I still think we have a lot of hard questions to ask. What are the areas in which we're still being disproportionate? Why are those things not moving? What is contributing to that? When we reduce, if our system changes or just reducing overall suspensions, what's the next thing that we have to do to dig into that disproportionality? And I think that these things can take years, 2 years, 3 years, knowing and understanding that every kid has only so much time in school, so there's urgency there. But we have to bring the system along with us. But happy to share with you all any other information. We can collect that at the end of the meeting, or you can send an RFI and we can get that to you really quickly.
Of the 218 suspensions, let's say for the Latino population or student population, they could be multiple suspensions? Like one student can get 1 or 2 or 3 suspensions? Is
Yeah.
that what
So
you're saying?
on this particular view, it's with one or more. So the total number of suspended students is, I'm just eyeballing it, about 240 higher than these numbers here. Those would be for students who are suspended more than one time. But the numbers on this particular view are the numbers who have been suspended once or more.
The more concerns me a little bit, okay? And I guess I would like to get more information in terms of the more. Yeah.
So to clarify, the data that you'd be looking for is when we look at students who have been suspended 2 or more times versus just once? Does that make sense? Yeah, we can get that information to you, for sure.
And the reason I'm asking is research, as you know, indicates that kids that are suspended more than twice are more likely not to complete. Yeah.
And just pointing out the obvious, this is really important data because it was one of the things we said we would address when we decided to go with school safety officers and not have SROs. So I think to the extent that we can share this with our community to show that we're getting the results that we were hoping to, and I understand, Dr. Anderson, it'll take a couple of years to fully shake out, but I just think it's really important information to share about what the impacts of those decisions have been.
So when one of the things that we're on track to do less of is refer students to law enforcement. So we are currently on track to have less of that going on than we had last year, and a lot less than we had in the 2019-20 year, which was our last sort of normal year. It just didn't go as long, but even as much as far as that year went, right, there were 62 referrals to law enforcement. I did leave the 2021 year on there. I would not recommend that as a comparison. Good chunks of that year were virtual. It was not a normal year for making comparisons, but I do believe we're on track for what we'll see. But one of the ways we can look at the practice, though, that we have is we can ask, we ask schools to do something in lieu of suspending students, and in lieu of some other practices, right? And that was to use restorative practices. That is up substantially over even last year, which was up very substantially over the normal year prior. So there is something that's being done instead. And on the next slide, we can see that there are differences by group also, right? And there are particularly large gains for Latinx students. And there are gains in every large group here that we have. So there is some indication here of gap closing kind of work being done as far as the.
So a couple points to point out to you, board members. I want to be really clear on slide 8. John, if you can go to slide 8. Right, when the board heard from our community and passed a resolution to move away from the SRO model, we said at that point in time, and I'll reiterate today, that the issue, that one of the big underlying issues from our system was the referrals to law enforcement, that we didn't have de-escalation strategies and systems in place where we were going from an issue and then escalating it to law enforcement, which then resulted in higher levels of arrests, ticketing, citations, so on and so forth, once we had escalated students. So the idea that we've changed a system and invested in a system that allows us to de-escalate and provide the different levels of supports as opposed to referring to law enforcement, I think is a significant sign that the systems that we have are doing what they're intended to do. Furthermore, the idea that restorative practices overall and by subgroup, the way that is growing leads me to conclude we're getting much closer to a place where I would call it culturally embedded in our schools, where when you say restorative practices, folks have had some training on it, schools have utilized it. You don't get this type of growth without it being something that we're actually doing. Now, I think as we move forward, we need to hone in to make sure we're always using, restorative practices isn't the end-all be-all, right? There's some things that needs restorative practices, other things that might need different interventions. And so making sure we're honing in and dialing in to get that right. But the great news is that it's not like we gave them a one-and-done training and then expected folks to use it. We've embedded resources within the central office, and we've provided additional trainings. And our resources in the central office are going out and actually training, like a train-the-trainer model in schools so they can do it themselves. And so just some comments on the past 3 slides that Jonathan shared.
Nicole?
Appreciate the work around this. This really speaks to what's happening at schools, and I'm grateful for all of that. I was looking at these slides ahead of this meeting. It took me a few passes because the titles are not on either of the axes, and the lines themselves are not intuitive. So for a public that might not be watching this meeting, it would be really helpful if we can get those on there because these are not very clear without sort of the dialogue you're providing.
Just to clarify, the bottom axis is the days, and then the other axis is the number of referrals.
Yeah, when they end on different, yes, got that bit.
Lisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree, Rob, with some of the things you were saying, that when our community and our equity council and our DAC came to us and asked us to make this change with SROs, I know there were some folks in our schools that were incredibly enthusiastic and supportive, and others for whom this felt hard and they weren't sure what it was going to look like. And being able to look at this data that you've brought us today and seeing that this is getting progressively better and better, and I think to your point will only continue on that trajectory, is incredibly exciting. And I think every time we hear from folks who speak about how they weren't sure what this would look like and they had some concerns around it, and how since its implementation, the work we're doing has just blown them away. And I think all of our teachers and students and parents, every time I talk to anybody who's had the opportunity to come in contact with our SSAs and engage with our programming, it's clear that the work your team has done around this issue, which was a very loose sort of mandate that we gave them as a board, and you all really shaped it and ran with it, and have just done remarkable work in creating something that I think nationwide folks should be mirroring.
And I will say one of the strengths, I think, to what we've implemented was just this deep commitment to co-creation every step of the way. Being very careful, listening, hearing our community, and inviting them to the table in ways where they'd never been invited to the table on a topic like this before. Very, very powerful. Again, more work to do. I don't know that the work is ever done, but I think that very proud of the progress that we've made in this area.
Richard?
So the referrals to law enforcement, those referrals are for, can you give me a general idea in terms of what kids are getting into that require referrals to law enforcement?
I think we can get you, to the extent that they're so small, we've only, if I start talking, I wouldn't want to, I think that what's the end size where we can start talking about those things, Jonathan? This is probably too small. I think at the end of the year, we could take a look at a reflection and share that information.
We're also studying our investments in Grad Plus. And what we're seeing overall with Grad Plus is that the investments in the additional personnel that you see here are leading to increased student participation, course offerings, and opportunities. Our implementation study includes not only tracking data, but also talking to the personnel who do this work to understand their models and to find where we see promising trends and things that we can learn from. As Jonathan and I have mentioned right now, we're studying implementation. And in many ways, this is a forward-looking story. So next fall, we'll have more data on the impact of these investments. What we do have right now is preliminary data that has been shared with the board and that we'll just lightly review, and then also some new participation data. As Dr. Gallegos and Dr. Huffman shared back in March, we see an increase of 20% in students registered for work-based learning courses, an increase in the number of AP tests and courses being offered. We have an increase in the number of concurrent enrollment courses, and we have a new concurrent enrollment update for spring semester. So this is an update as of April 10th that shows our concurrent enrollment participation rate indicates a 256% increase in 1 year, due mostly to the number of courses now offered at our BVSD high schools. We have big increases in concurrent enrollment sections being offered, with a 173% increase in sections offered at our high schools. Of course, this improves accessibility to concurrent enrollment opportunity for all of our students. And more great news, we see a dramatic increase in student participation in concurrent enrollment from last year to this year, and those increases show up across all student groups. And while all of the increases are pretty impressive, the greatest increase you see here is that of 415% for Hispanic Latinx students. So in summary...
One second, sorry, Laura.
Yes.
Lisa.
This is a quick question and just out of curiosity, but my memory is that one of the reasons we had so few concurrent enrollment classes initially was just that it was a very onerous process for folks to get signed up. Is that correct? And when I look at this increase, I'm wondering if that's because that process got easier. I think we were trying to work with folks to change it, or if we just had a lot of teachers who were committed to sticking it through and managed to push through to get their certification to get this done.
I think that's a piece of it. I think this has really led, I think that at the root of this is just the vision of the school district, this board, and making this a priority. I think that, the investments that Dr. De La Cruz referred to, which is we had added a couple of additional staff to really promote the programs, to help and support teachers who are wanting to get certified, has paid off in great ways. And I just think the word has gotten out. I mean, for years, we were very much under-enrolled in concurrent enrollment, and I think that depending upon the schools, if the college course that you wanted to take wasn't an AP course or an IB course at your school, right, it wasn't deemed accessible. But when we think about the courses that we're offering, we've broadened the opportunity for college before graduation in many more different subjects. And I think that that's helped significantly. The process isn't perfect. Like a lot of teachers are still struggling to get certified. We're working with them and trying to make that easier. I've had meetings with Front Range myself, along with their new leadership, and we're working towards fixing some of those issues. Some of the requirements are, I think, negotiated with faculty, which makes it a little bit tougher to move. But I do think that it's kudos go to our teachers who are just kind of really sticking it out and then staying with it. But again, I think that, when we see, huge, massive increases across the board, it speaks to a strategic plan that's working here in BVSD.
Well, thank you. And yes, I think what you said was sort of exactly, it was just a point of curiosity for me. But thank you so much to the teachers, exactly, who, if it is still sort of this much work to get it done, are willing to do it to make these course offerings for our teachers, for our students, rather. That's really remarkable, and obviously it's made an enormous difference.
Nicole?
So one thing we talk about a lot here is equitable access to opportunities. If we go back to the slide for the concurrent enrollment courses offered across our high schools, depending on where you go to school, your access to these courses is drastically different. And I wonder if we can speak to how we are trying to increase those numbers. It looks like everybody's increasing. Some are further along. But how are we incentivizing some of our schools that are lagging in this aspect of our strategic plan to help provide more opportunities for our students?
I think that's the right question. To the extent that at some of the schools, when I think about Centaurus and Fairview, they have IB programming that the other schools don't have. So those are additional opportunities that could be an impact in regards to the concurrent enrollment courses they're able to offer at this point in time. When I look at Monarch and I look at Broomfield, they're gaining at a pretty similar pace. And Boulder, I think they've all gained about 13, 14 sections, which is wonderful. Some of our schools, Arapahoe Ridge, New Vista, some of our smaller schools might not ever be able to offer all of those offerings just because their student counts are low. So I think that it's great to look at the increase in AP and the increase in concurrent enrollment sections offered to really broaden the opportunities for, we call it college before graduation, because there's different ways you can do that. In addition to the CLEP programming that Dr. Gallegos talked to you all about, that's going to be at Centaurus High School, which is going to help increase those numbers as well. I think at the end of the year, we'll be able to have a really better, a holistic view on where we are with this year over year in regards to the credits earned for kids. And that'll be the best way to mash all these things together to see the collective impact. Because we haven't asked anybody to give up things to do concurrent enrollment. This is in addition to. And some of the other schools had just more robust offerings because they had IB programming.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Richard, then I have a question.
Very quickly, if you go back to your AP course offerings, and my question is, did the increase of course offerings, did it increase the number of kids of color taking AP classes? Because I don't, is the information in here? Because I didn't see it.
Yeah, that would have been in the March update with Dr. Gallegos. Happy to dig back into that and reshare it with the board.
Do you recall what it was? I can't remember. Yeah. But there was a big increase.
Yes, and I believe we do have that. We have the exact wording and data that was shared then that we can just reshare with you. I'm sorry, I don't have it at my fingertips right now.
So Rob, I just wonder about bandwidth of the students at the Boulder and Fairview and Centaurus. If you're taking an IB or AP course load, you don't have the bandwidth to add a lot of concurrent enrollment classes. So I think this data, if you don't understand that, could be kind of misleading to people. So maybe if there's some explanation we could give to help people understand, because at least the students that I've talked to that are in those courses don't have the ability to add concurrent enrollment classes.
No, and I think that I don't know this for certain, but my instincts tell me that this growth is from kids who weren't taking any college classes before, right? And so into that regard, so maybe it's only a few sections, but these are kids who weren't getting any college before graduation. Again, I think at the end of the year, when we look at credits earned, college credit earned, and you look at a comprehensive view of this, I think it'll tell that story, right? Like, so, when we share this data, I would hope that for the public, what they don't take away from this is, oh, this number's big, this number's small. We try to be very transparent in how this is working, but know and understand that all of our high schools are really working to make sure that kids are getting access to all four aspects of our Grad Plus framework, and this is just one of four, and are all working incredibly, they're working diligently, working hard, and getting results,
So if you could, it's the best question, if there's even anecdotal evidence about that, I think that would tell a really compelling story as to which kids are now taking this that weren't having access to it or taking it before. And then I just have a question about Boulder Prep and Justice. Do we have data for them? Do they have the same access to these kinds of, because I would think those student body populations would really benefit from the kind of access to this.
Well, I think the teachers would have to go through the credentialing, and so I don't know where they are in regards to the credentialing that they use to hire their teachers, and then how far along they are. I'm guessing if they were having increases, we would have included them in here, but maybe not. We can get you more info on that. Because I do know that Justice High has some kids taking some earning college before graduation, so we need to dig into that.
So I'm wondering I don't know how to phrase this, the difference in how you attain college credit through either IB or AB, AP, or concurrent enrollment. Because I know with AP, you have to take a test and get a certain score, right? And I don't know does IB give you college credit?
It can, depending upon where you apply for college, right? So I think that's what, there are. Now, there's some schools where they won't give you college credit, but you're not getting in unless you take these APIB concurrent courses and do well in them. So it's just depends on the receiving institution. I believe State University system in Colorado, there's opportunities to get credit for AP and IB, probably a 3 or higher. That's what I'm accustomed to, a score on those exams. But I will say, even if kids don't get a 3 on an AP exam, the experience of going through the rigors of a challenging course often prepares them for college, even if they don't get the credit. So.
And correct me if I'm wrong, so all of the concurrent enrollment, either through Front Range or Metro, that is, you pass the course, you get the credit, correct? And it is transferable in the state. Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you.
And I think to your point, Rob, sometimes if you don't get the credit, it at least allows you to take a higher level class at college. If you can prove you got a certain score on a AP or IB, like you could start at calculus instead of pre-calculus or something. So you get some kind of benefit even if you don't get the credit.
A couple of
Richard?
interesting things here. I also participate in the Board of Trustees for the Community College System. And we've had a lot of conversations around concurrent enrollment. And one of the concerns that they're seeing at that level is that concurrent enrollment high schools are increasing the enrollment at community college systems more than their regular enrollment. But their concern is the kids keep taking concurrent enrollment classes, but it's not getting them anywhere. Because they can end up taking so many credits, but it's not getting them anywhere towards an Associate of Arts degree or, at the community college system. So that's a question that I have in terms of that. And the other thing is I'm looking at the slides here, and I'm looking at the 415% increase of Hispanic Latino students. And then I go back to the others, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, where are they at? And maybe you can help me here, if you can help explain what FRCC, Campus Select, FRCC, District Select, is that where that percentage is coming from? That 415% increase?
Those are the campuses that we partner with for our concurrent enrollment courses.
So what's FRCC, HS Select? Those are in high schools?
High school select, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, those are courses embedded on our high school campuses. So a kid signs up in third period, they go to their concurrent enrollment class. Campus Select and District Select are where you have to go to a separate campus. And it looks like Metro State has some virtual as well.
And the 418% increase or 415% increase of concurrent enrollment, is that through FRC High School Select?
Most likely.
Most likely, okay. Thank you.
Just one more.
Go ahead, Beth.
Obviously, it's very exciting to see all these increases, 415%. Even 125% is pretty significant, but it's obviously much lower than the other categories here. What do we make of that? Why less of an increase in our Black and African American student population?
Well, smaller numbers and demographics overall, and we are excited about that 125% increase. We're going to continue to reach out to students across all groups to increase participation, across all of our campuses. And I think relative to demographic groups, that's why we see different numbers across groups and smaller numbers in our Black African American population.
I don't think there's any more questions right now.
Okay, so we can summarize. So in summary, our AORI work moves forward with implementation study and evaluating the impact of our investments. As you've seen, we're very active in right now. We plan to continue monitoring the data, the outcomes, and the trends, and reporting back to the board at regular intervals.
And before we open up to questions, just want to commend this board for continuing to push staff to be thinking of our investments in terms of return on investment. I mean, the work I think that the ARI work we're doing here, which is going to inform the ways that we bring budgets to you all, I think is really impressive. It's the right work. I think a lot of school boards and superintendents and school districts do a lot of wondering when they make investments. Will it work? Will it not work? How will we know? And we're able to, and it's hard, right? This takes a lot of time and effort. But when the board presses us on these issues, as you should, we have a process and a methodology and expertise to be able to share with you. And this would be, we've shared with you things that haven't worked before and we've stopped doing. And we're showing you things tonight that are working that we propose that we continue to do. And so, again, just commend this board, commend our team. Bill, Jonathan, Laura spend a lot of time and effort on the front end. Here's what we want to do. Here's how we'll measure it. Then they're actually going back and measuring it and being really transparent. And so just really proud of our team, proud of this board for the work around AORI.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Nicole.
So when the district started taking on this AROI work in the very early stages, there was a clearer connection to programmatic cost versus outcome. And I know some of these things that we're looking at right now, harder to tie that to than a very specific intervention. But, and I know we still have the budget piece coming up. Is that something we're going to still look at when it's reasonable to look at that? Or, and are we going to be clear in areas where it just is too hard or doesn't necessarily make as much sense to look at those financial costs because we don't know exactly, maybe they're a little harder to measure, like our disproportionate discipline or Grad Plus. It's a little grayer than this reading intervention and how much it costs per per increase in a pupil. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think you're right. I think as it makes sense and it's clear, and we can state make those statements with confidence around, this outcome costs this much, this outcome costs that much. We'll be continue to do that, and that's an important aspect. So certainly.
That was kind of similar to my question, which is as we go forward, and I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but I can't see us maintaining everything we're doing now with the budget cuts that are looming. What other areas are we going to apply AROI in, and how are we going to use it? Is it just these 3 areas, and then how do you make the determination? Because I know, as Nicole was saying, that it doesn't all lend itself to a really neat and tidy, here's how much we invested and here's how much the returns are. But at the same time, as we have to start turning things off, instead of saying how great we're doing on these, which is awesome, how are we going to decide, and what's that going to look like?
Yeah, I think those are the difficult conversations that we need to prepare ourselves for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, as we see, and as you'll see today, the compounding impact of declining enrollment and averaging, right, which will begin to really start to impact our budgets in the next few years. To the extent the only ARI, like dollar comparison I could provide to you is when we didn't have it and the results we had versus paying for it and the results that we're getting now. The question can be, as we start to begin to dial, and many of those investments are one time around Grad Plus, right? We made 3-year investments, and so they weren't forever to have a decision point. And it may be a reanalysis of our system in 3 years to say, how much of that resource is needed to continue this. I think those are going to be the right questions that we'll have to ask ourselves, right? And then you'll see, you're going to see big spikes early, good investments and good programs, you'll see big early spikes, and then they'll begin to tail off because kids who didn't have the opportunity, you'll get that. I would anticipate we may see that. Maybe see impressive spikes again for a year, but at a certain point in time, those things will tail off. And then it's like when I spoke around this idea of restorative practices, when's it a part of the system versus a thing, right? When is it the part of the work of the district, as opposed to a thing that you got to, it's just what we do. I think about foundations, right? At first it was, we've got to get everybody doing it. Now it's culture. You couldn't take foundations out if you wanted to. That's the sign. So I do think that we will use this type of methodology. And what are the things that we would use for AROI? I think that we have to have conversations around that. We have to look at the expense. Maybe we have to do another review of some of the more expensive programs that we're investing in and the returns and results. But that would be like the next iteration as we think about in the fall or in next spring of bringing that forward. I don't have a list of things that are next on the list. We'll have to do a little bit more analysis on that.
And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, as the ARPA and federal money starts drying out, then we've used that to fund programs and some personnel. I just get really nervous. And you start to hear that in the schools. Please keep this person, please keep that was on temporary funding. So I think figuring out the impact of certain personnel is going to be really challenging, I think, right? Other than anecdotally, when you hear how great that person was for a certain family.
We're totally hearing that. Somebody who's in schools all the time. And we remind folks, that some of these investments are either grant funded or one-time funded, and we designed our weighted differentiating funding with a stop and decision point, right, intentionally, so it's not, people know that. I think that as we, and you can't blame, when you've got great people doing great work, you can't blame folks to say, hey, can hang on to this? But at a certain point in time, the tension becomes too great when you're losing students. The state isn't, fully buying down the negative factor. They're hanging on to money that should give them back to us 13 years ago. There will be tensions there. We'll have to make some tough decisions. But I think we're in great position to have those conversations.
And so the question I came up with earlier, and I may just have to do an RFI on it, but I'm just curious how much of our budget is dependent on grant funding. And I don't mean title funding, I mean just other grant funding. Because I think that's how the state rolls, we're good at, because we have good grant writers and we have good staff, and we have good data to support it, but I think we have a fair amount of our budget that's dependent on grant funding, and I don't think our public understands that, so.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really helpful RFI.
I'm looking at Bill to see if he glares at me when I say something like that. Board members, anything else on this? Rob, anything else?
Just on the
Panel,
grant,
anything else?
on the grant piece, I think you bring up a great point, Kathy, that, we have to maybe change our focus as an organization to utilize more grant writers, more bandwidth. If that's how the state's going to continue to roll money out to us, you got to apply for it. Maybe we may need to adjust. And that'd be a real easy academic return on investment, or just straight return on investment, because you have an individual in the amount of dollars they bring in, so.
Just makes me chafe that public education would have to do that, but I get it. Those are the rules they're playing by. All right, anything else? Thanks, everyone, that was really helpful. So you want to do the next introduction? Sure, does anyone need a break? All right, a 2-minute break. Back in session, Dr. Anderson, if you could introduce our next speaker. I think we all know him, but just for the public.
Thank you, Board President Gephardt, members of the board. My honor to introduce our Chief Financial Officer, Bill Sutter, who is going to walk you through where we are at with our preliminary budget. He'll walk through some of the processes that you'll be very familiar with, and then walk you through some of the details, knowing that that this can't be finalized yet because School Finance Act has not been finalized. Some of the assumptions that he has used are from potentially previous versions. I think that there is the bill drops tomorrow, I believe, and so I'm not sure if he'll speak to that or not, but with the information we had, I feel like it's important to provide this to you all in a work session. So with that, go ahead, Bill.
All right. I will go as rapidly as I can. So the next step in the process of developing the budget for the next year is this preliminary budget. I just want to point out, and I say this every year, that the preliminary budget, unlike the budget that gets adopted in June or again in January, does not need to be balanced. So, foreshadowing. And we still do have some time left in the budget development cycle before things need to be finalized. So, this is what I'll walk through real quickly: the budget development timeline and milestones, the input, enrollment, the preliminary budget, and next steps. So the timeline and milestones, this is information that has been presented multiple times. It's in several different documents. I think we did this in September and December with the board, so I won't go through it in detail, but the big red line is where we are now. So we have been moving through all the various data inputs that come to us along the way, the feedback sessions with the work sessions and board meetings we've been having, as well as some of the action items as we have done things like rolled out the enrollment for schools. So again, this helps just sort of shadow out where we've been and the last few things that are left on the table as we move forward. Just to note that next Tuesday we will do a very similar, there might be some changes between now and then, but a very similar presentation at the a study session or an information session within the regular board meeting. So on the input side of things, the focus has been on developing the budget this year. Employee compensation, certainly with the high inflation that we're experiencing, making sure that we're passing along every dollar that is feasible onto employees. The strategic initiative investments, which include special education, bilingual education, and Grad Plus, as well as addressing those achievement gaps, opportunity gaps, and disproportionality, as well as inflation in other line items within the district, and those will become more evident as I get through some of the numbers. So on the input side of things, this is just a reminder of the various ways that the superintendent and staff are able to collect input from a variety of public sessions, meetings with various parent groups, feedback sessions with the board, direct one-on-one school visits with the superintendent. So there's a robust opportunity throughout the year. And this isn't referencing a specific, let's sit down and give some budget input as a type of meeting, but more focus on the strategic plan and the actions that need to be taken within the district. So just real quick, some review of the public board meetings and work sessions that we've done over the last 8 months or so, all the way back into September, where we did that first update of those milestones and input slide. Meetings on Unified Improvement Plan, Strategic Plan metrics, Grad Plus, Long Range Advisory Committee, Academic Return on Investment, the standard December meeting where we do the budget outlook, and also those milestones. Moving into the first of the year, the revised budget for the current year, that does give us an indication of where we're moving for the next year as well. Then we have our draft strategic financial plan presentation and discussion, more DAX spending priorities, revised budget adoption, second quarter analysis, mid-year analysis. So needless to say, lots of feedback sessions with the board. Next, we'll move into enrollment. So I think the interesting thing here is the way we presented this information to include preschool as well as the tuition preschool students is showing no change in enrollment overall from the current year. So it just happens to be, I was a little surprised when the math worked out this way, that change in preschool enrollment, 442, matches the drop in the other groups of schools, so either general or non-charter, the charter schools, and online school. So again, this is, we're in a weird place with the universal preschool program rolling out, and tuition students, non-tuition students, expansion. So preschool, as we present student count and enrollment, is going to get a little tricky going forward, as those preschool students that used to be in the CPP program have been pulled out of our standard student count for the School Finance Act. Next, we'll move right into the preliminary budget. So we'll go through the general operating fund, revenues, transfer expenditures, one-time resources uses, and then a summary of changes, a couple of notes on some other funds that have significant notable changes, and then next steps. So on the revenue side, we have our net per pupil revenue change, this 12 million. So this is reflective of the 8% inflation number. So that is the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood CPI, Consumer Price Index, for the calendar year 2022, which is the inflation increase for funding in the next fiscal year. And that also reflects the enrollment decline. So as enrollment is declining, our net PPR change is not as much as it would have been if the students were still being counted. Our 25% mill levy override is indexed to that total program increase. Categorical funding, so there's a little 8% increase expected on the categorical funding. The budget stabilization factor buy down, that's the governor's proposal, was $120 million statewide. Specific ownership tax, so this is equalized and non-equalized specific ownership tax. The equalized portion is part of our funding. Non-equalized, part of the School Finance Act funding, one of the revenue streams for it. Non-equalized is the portion that we get to keep. As those shift, what is available to the district drops, and we've also seen a little drop in the collections of that SOT. So it's just an indication that there are other revenue line items that we have to account for $1.5 million is not a small dollar amount. So just as we're including the increase in interest earnings as interest rates have been climbing, we also have to recognize some of these revenue line items that might fluctuate from year to year. And then a few small changes in net other revenues. So $18.2 million in ongoing revenue adjustments at this time. For transfers, charter schools, so they're get that 8% increase in the School Finance Act funding, as well as an increase in the override funding. And then on the preschool fund, this is another adjustment that's being made as the universal preschool is being rolled out. So with the removal of Colorado's preschool program as a thing, we're no longer counting those students in the general fund as part of our enrollment count. They're being accounted for in the Colorado CUP, Colorado Universal Preschool Program. And so the revenue is coming out on the revenue side, so the transfer over to that fund is being reduced as well. For compensation, as I noted, that being a major focus of expenditures for the district, so an 8% cost of living adjustment for all employees, $24.7 million. The movement on salary schedules, steps, lanes, and attrition, $3.4 million. And then health and dental. Dental is actually a 0% increase, so this is all health insurance at $1 million for a 5% premium increase. So $29.1 million in compensation increases. Moving into budget adjustments. So these are changes that either have been implemented already. So for the ILC classrooms, that investment of special ed programming, those staff have already been rolled out to schools, and those job postings are out. On staffing formulas, so as our declining enrollment is happening, we adjust down our classroom teachers and paraeducators. Inflationary cost increases. So this is, again, one of those things that we have to manage and deal with as they come along. Utilities is just under $1 million of that $1.2 million. So was it almost 30% increase in natural gas and 7% increase in electricity. And so this is not a usage increase, this is just the inflationary increase on that. And then some testing requirements that we have. So if everybody remembers the lead water testing, so that's one of the things. Radon testing and stormwater management are all things that are ongoing expenditures, unfunded mandates that have come along that we just have to manage. So also in the prior preschool model, we had early childhood staff in the general fund, and so we're able to reduce those as that is all being accounted for in the new preschool program fund. So a reduction of expenditures moving forward on all those adjustments together. A few other changes. So the food service bad debt. So as the collections for unpaid lunch fees, we cannot write that off in the school lunch fund. It has to be written off in the general fund, but that goes away with the new Prop FF school free meals for all. So we're able to make that budget adjustment downward. We have included in here a substitute rate increase. So the normal inflationary 8% increase would get us to almost $125 a day from the current $115. This adjustment would take us up to $150 a day. We're currently at $165. That has been the difference of $50 from $115 to $165 was fully funded with one-time dollars this year. So this is a decision point that needs to be made as to putting that in ongoing funding and maintaining that rate going forward, or close to that rate going forward. So we've included it as one of the options that's been built into the budget so far. a human resources FTE, like a staff member for human resources for employee relations, investigations, working on activities that are really taking a lot of time in the human resources department. And then a few other small adjustments for security, IT, and bilingual ed expansion. So net total budget adjustments down by 0.1 million. So to summarize all this, 22.4 million in new revenues. We do have included on here potential funding, so these legislative actions, 2.8 million. This includes what is built into the School Finance Act that was dropped this afternoon and goes to the Senate Ed Committee tomorrow. A additional buy down from 120 million that was in the governor's proposal to 150 million that's been included in that proposal right now. We know that there will be amendments made to bring that up to 180. Whether that sticks or not is another question, but at least efforts are being made to increase, which I haven't built in that additional increase, but those are in the works as we speak. There's also a $40 million statewide increase for special education funding. That's about 1.9 million that will come to Boulder Valley. It's a per pupil amount based on Tier A and Tier B student categorizations based on the needs of students. And so that has a high likelihood of passing, but I did include it here in the potential legislative action funding items. And then again, compensation, 29 million, budget adjustments, basically net zero, and also net zero on the transfers. We still are a little bit upside down. This is not a scary place to be at this time of the year. This has been, we've been in this situation before in the past, so I am not one to, get too worked up over this. We are $400 or $500 million budget that can make different choices, and as we get through the rest of the legislative session, dial things in. So there are still opportunities to correct this, because we obviously can't bring forward a budget that is unbalanced. One-time expenditures, so we've had some discussion about that already this evening. Staffing reserve, so as we are experiencing enrollment inefficiencies with our schools and class sizes and things, so this is something we've been doing for a number of years now, so that we aren't going in and making adjustments to classes in the fall and moving teachers around and moving students around. This allows us to put the resources where we need to address those inefficiencies as they occur. Bandwidth support, that was one of the activities that we instituted this year. It's targeted at K-5 grades. Curriculum materials, so this is a 2-year, we're budgeting the full amount for the 2 years of curriculum materials, some digital materials and online. So these are largely paid over 2 years, cash out the door, expended over, I think, 5 years as the usage actually occurs. The virtual intervention program, as we were discussing, so this also includes a bilingual component of that, so it's an expansion of that VIP program for next year over what's in this year. And then continuing some of the support at school, so this is 3 positions for deans of students that are at 3 of our schools in Louisville that are still experiencing some struggles related to the impact of the Marshall Fire. Some other one-time positions. These are 2 half-time and 1 full-time position within human resources as we work to recruit staff, both in operations. The one full-time position is focused entirely on operation staff, so bus drivers, custodians, food service, some of those areas that we really struggle to be able to get folks in. Information technology, this is continuing a transition on a bond-funded position that's been with the district for a while. Communications support, some translation and department support there. And then Grad Plus and CTE Startup. So this is years 2 and 3 of what was put in the budget in the current year. So we just want to make sure that we account for that in the resources that are available, so we don't spend something twice. That would be bad. Continuing on, some miscellaneous program supports, security. These are all things that are pretty straightforward as one-time expenses, or really are able to be decided down the road as to whether something's going to be continued. Some expansion of Grad Plus with some stipends and software. And again, this is a 5-year implementation on the software, or not 5-year, a 5-year commitment on the software. And then as we expend more money, we increase our reserves to account for that. So I think the next, and then we have a transfer to the cap reserve fund of $1 million to cover some maintenance projects and equipment, so things that either aren't scheduled to be included in the bond or can't be included in the bond. And then also on the food service fund, we're able to reduce on a one-time basis the transfer from the general fund into the food service fund by $500,000. This really protects us just in case the participation and usage of the coming free meals is not as much as projected, and we need to go back to supporting the food service program with all those general fund resources. So this is a way to recapture a little bit into the general fund, but also hedge our bets in case we need to come up with that either in the middle of the year or for the next budget cycle. So here's our subtotal of what we have available, 16.7 million, and then the various uses, subtotals from those previous pages. So we're a little upside down on one time. Again, not a scary place to be, as we still do have some decisions that we can make. And as we get closer to the end of the year, recalculating our projected ending fund balance and seeing if there's maybe some more resources available or that will be available. The notable items in the other funds, so food services, as I've talked about a little bit, we have that implementation of the free meals for all. There is a little reduction in the per meal collections because the reimbursement rate is a little bit lower than what the current meal prices are. But again, with the growth in participation is how we think we're going to be able to reduce that transfer, the support, because for the pandemic years when it was fully funded by the feds at the higher Fed rate, and participation was pretty good, we were able to do pretty well in the food service fund. So again, as we get into this and see how this plays out, because folks still need to apply for free and reduced lunch meals, we need to process the community eligibility applications to the extent that we have any schools that qualify. There is a lot of work that has to happen. It's not quite the same as it was for the prior 2 years during the pandemic. With community schools, there's a pretty significant expansion of preschool enrichment for the universal pre-K. And then in the preschool fund, as I mentioned, the implementation of universal pre-K, or again, that CUP program, the Colorado Universal Preschool Program. So this is just a quick summary of the preschool fund, just to lay out some of the differences where we're transferring less from the general fund because of the CPP students, the Colorado Preschool Program that's ending, and not counting those students in the general fund. Some reduction in the tuition, the number of tuition students, because they now qualify for the services and the payment from the state. the payments under the universal preschool program is increasing revenue. Personnel, obviously a large increase in personnel there as we're expanding the number of students served. Non-personnel, the CPP community sites, we're no longer required to contract with some community sites, as well as some of the transactional costs that go into running a large new fund like this. And then we have to have a little bit of taper reserve for the fund as well. Cap reserve, the $1 million transfer I mentioned, and then operations and technology fund, some one-time expenses for enterprise casting software implementation, and a little bit of residual food service implementation to complete that project. Next steps. So we have next week the study item for the preliminary budget, as I mentioned. The legislative session ends in about 2.5 weeks. Then we'll bring our proposed budget to the board we have a public input session right before the board meeting on May 23rd, then the proposed budget study item on the 23rd, and then our tentative adoption on June 13th. The end. Oh, yeah.
So just so board members know, we didn't have that, so we were just trying to follow along. You'll
Yes.
attach it, because there was a
Because
lot
it
of...
might have been finished this afternoon, yes. So now we have another page or three to go through real quick. So all this is a little more detail on the numbers that I just ran through quickly. So it just provides, in some cases, a little more detail on some of the changes. So those revenue changes for legislative items that I mentioned, those are broken out in the 3 separate line items that are impactful to the district's general fund. Some of the more detail around our staffing changes, some of the details around the budget increases and budget changes that I mentioned along the way. I won't go through this line by line unless anybody really wants me to. It is color-coded, which is a little tricky to understand because there's negatives that are good and there's negatives that are bad, and there's positives that are good and I'd say bad, right? They're impactful to the bottom line of the district. So generally speaking, if something is blue on this page, it is a positive balance or a positive impact to a revenue or an expense. And if it's a red number, that means it's a negative balance or a negative impact to the bottom line or resources available. This does say draft on it because, as we mentioned, the School Finance Act was, as of about 10 o'clock Monday morning, was not as robust as this. And then we got word that it changed, which was beneficial. Those changes have been included in the proposal that's out there right now. And so, again, going from here, we're optimistic that there will be additional revenues. But again, we kind of have to let that play out, the committees and their amendment actions and votes and things like that.
Nicole?
This is a lot to digest. at
It is.
present. Something that caught my eye in part because it was on the slide and it's a little bit more detail here. We show a one-time expenditure for UVA, the UVA program that's expanding in our middle schools. Are we still continuing to pay for UVA support at our elementary schools that have participated, or is that grant funding? It's no longer needing to be shown here. Can you talk about why one of them is shown and one of them is not?
Certainly. So our partnership with UVA's Partners for Leadership and Education is intended to build capacity, and then the schools move on. So all the schools that were trained in UVA are continuing to use those practices. We're not being charged, for being in an active program. For the UVA program for middle schools, as a reminder to the board, we're using that as a catalyst for middle school improvement. Broomfield Heights, Casey Middle, and Angevine are part of that program. And that the dollars you see there are also paired with, is it ESI funds? EASI funds from the state, so half grant funded, half district funded.
So this is the portion that is not funded by the grant.
And then I'm still having a hard time mentally when we lump our PK numbers into our enrollment numbers and make it look like we're even on enrollment, but they're funded very differently. Is there a way to separate that out, or do we know for sure how we're getting funding for our preschool students? And does it look like full funding? How does it look compared to?
So it's not as much as the per pupil revenue. There is no tie-in to the School Finance Act. It is a mysterious calculation as to how the CDEC, Department of Early Childhood, Colorado Department of Early Childhood, came up with those numbers. They were distributed based on the region or the district, but we know that number, and that's how the fund has been built, with that projection of total students that are 3-year-olds that qualify for funding, as well as all 4-year-olds that qualify for funding.
Yeah, and part of, I think, the disconnect is just that visual when we look at overall enrollment not decreasing, but we're looking at staff decreasing because enrollment in our K-12 has decreased. It just feels like a disconnect in the message of the slides. I understand the budget, it works itself out a little bit, but just our community is so used to looking at enrollment numbers and tying them a little bit more cleanly to funds. So just a point of clarification there.
And Beth?
Thanks. Well, Nicole, you asked most of one of my questions. So compared to what we got for preschool under the former model, how much are we getting with the new model? Or can you even compare it?
It's a little tough to compare because in the old model, it was half-time funding, right? So 0.5 FTE for a CPP slot, or a preschool student with special needs slot. The new model is 10 hours in some cases, 15 hours in other cases, 30 hours in other cases, and so it depends on the mysterious calculation that the state has put together as to what students qualify for what, that we haven't actually been transferred any of that information yet,
Okay.
as the state has had some challenges.
And then will there be tuition for students who, qualify, say, for 10, but they want to stay?
A 3-year-old who does not have the qualifying factors to have funded hours is a regular preschool tuition-paying student.
Just like it's always?
Just like it's always been.
Okay.
For the students, parents that want extended day, so the model is full days, across the week. So 2 full days and then 2.5 days of enrichment. So enrichment is being handled, as the note I had in here on with community schools. So expanding the preschool enrichment program. So that is fully tuition-based as it has been.
Like kindergarten enrichment used to be?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So, a couple of years ago, I'm looking at the food bad debt. A parent got involved and put out a call to the community, for people to make donations to our fund. And do you remember, did that make a significant difference?
I don't recall the
Okay.
exact amount that was raised through that. I know Impact on Education made a contribution to offset some of that last year, I think. So there have been activities over the year to address that.
And how do you project the specific ownership tax? It's like, do you know how
Quantum
many people
physics.
are buying cars?
It's based on historical trends. So are the trends trending up, trending down? What do the collections look like? So it's based on historical data for the most part.
And then where would the Juul settlement come in? Because I understand we were going to use it to help fight vaping or something?
It will likely come into the general fund as it's just a resource to the district. It's not a grant, it's not a special revenue or anything like that. So it'll just come into the general fund and then used as a one-time resource like anything else.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple questions around the substitute rate increase to 150. Does that reflect that will be our base rate? And will we still have the opportunity to do kind of the surge pricing model we've been doing historically, or is that up for debate?
Yes, both. Up for debate and an opportunity to do it. Anything additional has not been built into the budget as of yet. I think we have that opportunity to see what the need is relative to that, and quite frankly, still make the decision as to whether that full additional increase would be included, depending on how those ongoing resources. It's an expenditure that is arguably needed, but not. We have more choice around it, I would say.
Lisa or Richard?
Sure don't.
Nicole?
And this is more of a practice question. These negative numbers, not the end of the world at this point. Are we as a system in a regular practice of searching for operational efficiencies when it comes to how we're funding things as a district? And I think for looking ahead might be an opportunity to continue to rely on or need as budget conditions shift. But is that a practice we currently have, looking system-wide for efficiencies in our budget items and some of these bigger budgets in particular, buckets in particular, sorry?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that as we went through our budget process, that there were a lot of efficiencies that that were looked for, to the extent that I think that when we get to a place where the enrollment, the averaging starts to catch up with us, it's not even about efficiencies, it's about choices. And I think that we need to prepare ourselves as a community, as a board, as a school district, to begin to start to really think about, we can't do everything, right? What is it that really aligns to the outcomes that we're looking for? And so, the budget processes as we move forward are going to have to adjust to that changing environment.
I appreciate that. And looking for those efficiencies now, I think will make some of those adjustments and prioritizations easier when we're already trying to run slightly leaner than we have been in the past. So that gradual shifts are easier for everybody than really large ones.
Any other questions, board members? I know we aren't doing agenda setting, Rob, but I think it would be, how did our lead and water testing come out? Can we get an update on that at some point? I got a thumbs up from Rob because it's a line item on here.
Sounds like we can do that.
So can you tell us what we can expect next week, maybe by Monday?
Virtually the same thing unless something changes. So,
You already talked about things changing, so.
to the extent that the legislature doesn't do something last minute before next Tuesday, it will be largely the same as this.
And then I have just another question, Rob. I don't think the $1 million transfer to our cap reserve anywhere covers what our actual needs are. Can we get a sense of what that delta is? Because we can't cover it all with bonds, we can't cover it with general reserve, so we just kind of kick those needs down the road. So I'd just be curious how much we're leaving unresponded to.
We can get some more specifics as we present next week. We'll make sure that we're able to present that.
So how do you want us to, if we have additional questions, send them to you as, if we get this sometime?
Yeah,
So we have
absolutely.
time to digest it?
Absolutely.
Because I think we're all still kind of drinking from a fire hydrant right
Totally
now.
appreciate that. I think that's why we're bringing this back to next week as an information item. Between now and preferably Friday, if you all could send your questions to me. If you have questions or clarifications, we can make sure that those are addressed when we present on Tuesday.
Okay. All right, board members, anything else for the good of the cause? All right, motion to adjourn. Moved by Kitty, seconded by Beth. All right, thanks, everyone.